remember the sunlight from those days as if it were still warming the back of my neck. It wasn't the kind of sunlight you see in portraits hung in aristocratic halls. No, mine was gentler. It filtered through the wooden shutters of our little home, danced on the loose threads of my mother's sleeves, and painted soft halos on the lavender bush that lined our crumbling stone fence. That was Beauseil, the village where I was born, a name that means beautiful sky in Old French. My father always said it proudly, but I often wondered if he'd made it up, just to dress up the quiet poverty we lived in. We had a small house, 2 stories high, with a slanted tile roof and creaking floorboards that whispered with every step. The front door groaned so heavily that I often imagined it sighing each time we left or came home tired, just like Mother. Behind the house stood 3 pear trees, and beyond them, a meadow where white geese gathered in flocks like scattered clouds against green. My father was a watchmaker, a quiet man who barely smiled in public but became playful when it was just Mother and me. He had a small workshop that smelled of oil and brass, where tiny gears glimmered like gold dust under afternoon light. I used to sit by the door and watch his hands move, precise, patient, reverent. The way he touched time made me think he was not merely repairing watches, but taming something sacred. Mother, on the other hand, was light itself. She was the hum of lullabies in the morning, the scent of cloves on her apron, the warmth in my soup, and the wind in my hair. Her voice was soft, but it filled the entire house. She was the kind of woman who made every room feel like summer, even in the dead of winter. She never raised her voice. Even when things were hard, she smiled. And so I smiled too. My childhood was barefoot afternoons and laughter tangled in tall grass. I played hide and seek behind the vineyard walls with the other village children, made pies from wet earth, and crowned myself with daisy chains. I declared myself the princess of summer with mud on my knees and wildflowers in my hair. Once, I used seashells to pin up my curls and ran to show Mother. She knelt down, held my face in her hands, and said, "You are royalty to me, my love, with or without a crown." Every night before sleep took me, I would whisper to the ceiling beams my dream, to build Mother a house one with lace curtains, a garden full of jasmine, and a room just for her to sew in peace, my kingdom of stone and dreams. In the evenings, we lit candles. Father would sip his tea while Mother read aloud from her tattered storybooks. My favorite stories were the ones with clever girls and hidden courage, the ones where the smallest voice defied the loudest fate. I always thought, if it were me, I would do the same. Time passed like the gentle ticking in Father's workshop, slow, unbothered, full. On Sundays, we walked to the village church, not out of duty, but because Mother loved to sing hymns beneath the vaulted ceilings. Her voice floated up like mist. I used to fall asleep on her lap, the sound of the organ mingling with the scent of her lavender soap. We were not rich, but I never felt poor. Sometimes dinner was only stale bread and weak soup, yet Mother always served me the bigger half. I never questioned it. I thought that was just what mothers did until much later, when I learned that not every child has a mother willing to go hungry so her daughter could sleep with a full belly. Rainy days were our favorite. We'd sit by the hearth, me tucked under her shawl like a kitten, reading old tales until the fire turned to embers. On some days, she would pull out her old embroidery and hum melodies I didn't recognize. They were sad and beautiful. I didn't ask about them then. I was too busy watching the orange glow on her cheeks, wondering how someone could be both so soft and so strong. There's one memory that returns to me most vividly, though it is not tied to any grand event. I was 11, not quite grown, but no longer a child. It was a summer evening, and the whole village had gathered by the riverbank. There was no holiday, no occasion, just a shared need to watch the sky blush pink and purple before nightfall. Someone brought a fiddle, someone else clapped rhythm. The air smelled of bread and pine needles. I stood with my arms stretched wide, spinning in the tall grass, laughing until I fell backward into the earth. And as I lay there, staring at the first stars pricking the dusk, I whispered, I never want to leave this place. I meant it. I had no idea that within a year I would be married, and the earth would never feel soft beneath my back again. There are moments in a child's life that seem small when they happen, like a shadow passing over a window pane, or the way a door creaks slightly longer than usual. But later, when you look back with adult eyes, you realize they were the beginning of something, or the end. That summer, the last before everything changed, felt like a dream so golden I can still feel it on my skin. I was 11, nearly 12, and the world had started to stretch in strange directions, my legs longer, my voice softer, my dreams deeper. But home stayed the same. A place where time didn't rush. Mother woke me every morning with the scent of baked pears and warm milk. Her hands were always cool when she brushed back my hair, even in the heat of June. She had a way of pressing her lips to my forehead like she was sealing something in my joy, perhaps, or her protection. We spent most mornings in the garden. She planted herbs for cooking and teas, rosemary, thyme, chamomile. I helped her water the mint, chasing bees with a wooden spoon I called my scepter. She would laugh, and I would twirl, pretending the weeds were subjects bowing before me. Mother's hands were always moving, mending socks, peeling apples, rubbing lavender into my pillowcase. But even in stillness, she never seemed idle. Her presence was enough to fill the room. Sometimes I caught her staring out the window at the winding path that led away from the village. Her eyes would drift, far and quiet. I once asked her what she was thinking. She didn't answer. Instead, she took my hand and kissed my palm. If I could, I'd stop the years right here, she whispered. At 11? I giggled. Why not when I'm a lady? She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Because this is the last time you'll belong only to yourself. I didn't understand then. I thought she was being poetic. I didn't yet know that a girl's freedom is always temporary in a world built by men. In the afternoons, I would sneak away to the meadow with a book stolen from my father's shelf tales of explorers, rebels, or orphaned heroines with wild fates and braver hearts than mine. I'd read aloud to the birds, and sometimes to a shy brown rabbit who visited the same patch of clover. I named him Augustine. He never ran when I approached. I liked to think he listened. Sometimes Mother joined me, carrying needlework and a jar of honeyed tea. We would sit in the shade of the pear trees, and she would tell me stories from her girlhood, of stolen dances under moonlight, of riverside secrets, of promises made to boys whose names she never spoke. But the story she told most often was of the day she met my father. She had been walking home from the market with a basket of cracked eggs. He was crouched on the roadside, fixing the bent wheel of a stranger's cart. Their eyes met hers full of hesitation, his full of certainty. He offered her a piece of toffee and said, "If you marry me, I'll make you laugh every day." She didn't laugh. She married him anyway. And did he keep his promise? I asked every time. Mother always looked toward the house. Some days, she said. Some days I laughed. There was something quietly beautiful in the way she spoke of him, not romantic, not foolish, but as if he were part of the weather. A fact, a wind she had learned to sail with. That summer, Father came home later and later. His coat smelled of smoke and the harsh tang of brandy. He barely spoke at supper, eyes heavy, jaw tight. When I asked him about the gears he once loved, he waved me off. "They don't tick like they used to," he mumbled. Mother didn't argue. But after he fell asleep in the chair, she would open the windows wide, as if trying to let something dark out of the house. I remember watching her arms tremble once as she folded his shirt. It was the first time I realized that even strong things can shake. I began to notice small changes, groceries thinner, candles shorter, Father's boots cracked at the sole. One evening, I saw Mother open a drawer and count coins wrapped in ribbon. Her fingers were fast, practiced. There wasn't enough. Still, she smiled. Always smiled. She tightened my braids, hemmed my only dress, and said, "We are rich in love, and love is enough." I believed her. I had to. On the last Sunday of that golden summer, the three of us sat together in the garden for supper. Father had brought home apples, real apples, red and crisp, a gift from some traveling merchant he had helped. Mother baked them with cinnamon and butter. I still remember how the steam curled when she cracked them open, sweet and spiced and warm. We laughed that night, genuinely. Father told a joke about a rooster and a banker. I don't remember the punchline, but I remember his smile wide real. Mother reached for his hand across the table, and he didn't pull away. I told them about Augustine the rabbit and how he winked at me. They rolled their eyes, but I swore it was true. When the stars came out, we stayed in the garden. I lay on the grass, my head in Mother's lap, the scent of baked earth and lemon balm all around me. Fireflies blinked in the bushes like fallen constellations. I whispered, "I want to stay like this forever." Mother didn't answer right away. Then she leaned down and kissed my forehead. "That's the second time you've said that," she murmured. I blinked. "What was the first? When you were born? Your first night home? You cried and cried, and then suddenly stopped. You looked at me with those giant eyes and sighed, as if to say, 'All right, I'll stay.'" I laughed. She didn't. She just held me tighter. They say that autumn is the season of endings. I used to think it was only about leaves dying, curling into amber ghosts, and the days shrinking into thin, pale light. But that October, I learned that endings can come with paper quiet, crumpled, and smelling faintly of ink and desperation. It began with a knock at the door, a strange knock. Not the neighbor's cheerful thump. Not the gentle tap of Mother's fingertips when she forgot her key. No, this knock was slow, deliberate, like it didn't care whether we answered or not, like it had all the time in the world. I was sitting by the fire, threading blue ribbon through my last decent bonnet. Mother looked up from her mending. Father, who had been dozing with a book open on his chest, stirred and frowned. The door opened to reveal a man we had never seen before. He wore a long coat, dark as dried blood, and leather gloves that looked too new for country soil. His mustache was trimmed with surgical precision. His smile was worse than no smile at all. "Good evening, Monsieur Delacourt," he said to my father, as if they were already acquainted. Father stood slowly. "Do I know you?" The man removed one glove and produced a folded piece of parchment, sealed with a wax crest that I couldn't make out from where I sat. "You do now." He placed it into Father's hand, bowed stiffly to my mother, then turned and left, his boots silent on the path like the shadows of crows. Father didn't speak for a long while after the door closed. He just stared at the paper, then walked to his desk and unfolded it with hands that looked suddenly older. Mother rose and followed. I stayed where I was, watching them from the hearth, ribbon dangling from my fingers like a forgotten thought. They read in silence. Or perhaps they didn't need to read at all. Perhaps they already knew what it said. That night, there was no supper. The next morning, I awoke to the sound of Father arguing with someone outside. His voice was raised, not angry, but panicked. I peeked through the curtain and saw two men standing by our gate, dressed in gray and holding ledgers. They pointed at the roof, at the cart, at the fence. They were counting. Father was shaking his head, hands in fists. One of the men wrote something down, then tipped his hat mockingly and walked away. I ran to Mother, who was kneeling in the kitchen with an empty jar of jam in her hands. She was scrubbing it furiously, though it was already clean. "Maman?" She didn't look at me. Her voice was calm. "Go wash up, Sherry. We'll go to the market today." We didn't go to the market. Instead, We walked along the riverbank, where the trees had already begun to shed their gold. The wind was sharp and restless. Mother held my hand tighter than usual. I looked up at her and saw the corner of her mouth twitching as if she were biting back something bitter. Is Papa in trouble? I asked. She didn't answer right away. She plucked a leaf from my hair and smoothed it between her fingers. Sometimes, she said, the world becomes too heavy for good men to carry. That night, I listened at the stairwell as my parents whispered in the kitchen. I couldn't hear the words, only the tones, the crack of Father's voice, the long silences, the way Mother sometimes inhaled sharply, like she'd been struck in the chest. Then came a name, Warwick, a pause. Then, no, she's only a child. Followed by, we don't have a choice. I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling and traced the knots in the wood like constellations I didn't recognize. In the days that followed, things changed quickly. Father began selling tools from his workshop. Mother cut up old tablecloths to sew new underclothes. The neighbor's boy came over to take measurements of our cart, then returned it the next day looking solemn. One morning, I found Father burning papers in the fireplace. I reached for one before it curled. It read, Notice of Default. Words like repossession and seizure burned brighter than the flames. When he noticed me, Father didn't yell. He just sat beside me, covered in ash and something like shame. I never meant for you to see this, he murmured. You should be dreaming of dresses, not debts. I wanted to ask what would happen to us, but something in his eyes stopped me. It was the look of a man who had already given something up. A few days later, Mother received a letter thick, cream-colored, with gold ink at the corners. She held it like it was made of glass, read it in silence, then tucked it beneath her apron. That evening, she sat beside me on the bed, brushing my hair with long, slow strokes. Clara, she said, do you know what it means to be a lady? I shrugged. It means wearing gloves and speaking softly. She smiled faintly. Yes, and it also means knowing when to smile even when your heart aches. I turned to look at her, confused. Why would my heart ache? She paused, then kissed the crown of my head. I hope it never does, my little sunbeam. I truly hope it never does. But of course it would. Of course it did. The first time I saw him, he didn't look like a man at all. He looked like a painting, a tall figure pressed into too perfect stillness, draped in the kind of fabric that only exists in rooms that don't smell of broth or damp stone. He stood beneath the bare-limbed walnut tree in our yard, one gloved hand resting on the hilt of an umbrella he hadn't used, though the morning sky had been weeping all night. He wore black from head to toe, like a shadow trimmed with silver. His coat had no speck of mud, his boots gleamed, and his gloves looked like they had never touched anything rougher than silk. I froze in the doorway. He turned, and when he looked at me, he did not smile. He assessed, like a merchant sizing a package before shipment, like a collector inspecting a rare book for wear on the spine. Clara, my mother's voice came, trembling and low. Come here, darling. I stepped forward. The man dipped his head in a gesture that was almost polite, but it lacked warmth. Even his voice, when it came, was polished to the point of sterility, like a floor so clean you could slip and break something. Charming, he said simply, though a bit small. She's still growing, my father replied quickly. Too quickly. The man's mouth twitched, not into a smile, more like the suggestion of one. Let's hope she doesn't grow too much. My late wife was slight. I've grown used to delicacy. I didn't understand what that meant, but my stomach turned. Mother placed her hand on my shoulder. It was shaking. Clara, she said softly, this is Lord Warwick. Lord. I had never met a lord before. I wasn't sure what they were supposed to look like. I had imagined capes, swords, and maybe horses with jeweled saddles. But this man, this Warwick, looked like the idea of winter in human form, not the romantic kind with snowflakes and hot cider. The kind that slips under your door, steals into your bones, and takes something with it when it leaves. Your parents speak very highly of you, he said, still staring. I like to read, I blurted, because it was the only thing I could think to say. He tilted his head slightly, as if I had confessed something quaint. A girl who reads, he mused. Dangerous, some would say. Then he laughed, not loudly, not cruelly, just briefly. Precisely, like punctuation, I looked at my father. His mouth was tight. My mother would not meet my gaze at all. I knew in that moment that something irreversible had begun. He stayed for tea. We didn't have china. We used our plain clay cups, and my mother had wrapped a linen cloth around the chipped spout of the teapot to hide it. She offered bread and quince jam. He didn't touch either. Just lifted his cup glove still on and sipped once. It's not often I come this far from my estate, he said, surveying our tiny kitchen like it was a curiosity in a museum. But I find the air refreshing, untouched. I imagine it's very different from where you live, my mother offered, her voice light, too light. Indeed, he said. But variety's good, especially in a household. He looked at me again. I looked away. For the rest of the visit, I kept my hands folded in my lap. I didn't speak unless spoken to. My mother praised my embroidery. My father mentioned how clever I was with numbers. I realized slowly that they weren't talking to him about me. They were selling me to him, polishing my edges, dressing me in words they thought he would like. I was a product, a trinket, and I didn't understand the price yet, but I knew I was the one who would be paying it. When he finally rose to leave, he extended his hand, not to my father, but to me. His glove was cold and stiff. I hesitated. Mother nudged me gently. Clara. I placed my hand in his. He didn't squeeze, didn't shake. He simply held it. And for a breathless second, I felt the weight of a future I hadn't chosen. It will be a pleasure to welcome you into my home, he said. Then he let go, and just like that, he was gone. That evening, I stood outside beneath the same walnut tree, staring at the patch of grass where he had stood. The wind had risen, tossing leaves in every direction. One landed at my feet, brown, curled, half-rotten. I picked it up, and for reasons I couldn't name, I pressed it into the back of my book and shut the cover tight. I once believed that promises important ones had to be made in the light, beneath the sun, in churches, or at the very least, in front of the person they concerned. But the promise that would determine the rest of my life was made in a kitchen that smelled faintly of ash, beneath the yellow hush of an oil lamp. No sunlight, no questions. No voice asked for mine. My father didn't look at me when he said yes. No one did. Warwick returned 3 days after his first visit. This time he was not alone. A second man came with him, older, with silver hair and an air like a closed book. He carried a leather folder and a silver-tipped fountain pen. Mother trembled as she set the kettle on the stove, though no one drank tea. I sat in the corner, fingers clenched in my lap, trying to make myself smaller, invisible. My father sat straighter than I'd ever seen him. He wore his best coat, though the sleeves were frayed and the hem unpressed. Whenever Warwick spoke, Father nodded. Whenever the silver-haired man wrote something down, Father's eyes dropped to the table. Mother said nothing. And then, for the first and only time, Warwick lifted his teacup. A signal, perhaps. A punctuation mark at the end of a transaction. Everything is settled, he said smoothly. The wedding will take place in early spring. Nothing lavish, just proper. Just correct. I remember every word. Each syllable landed like a door closing softly behind me, a latch clicking into place. That night, I asked my mother, am I really going to marry him? She was quiet for a long time, then softly, You'll be safe. I didn't know what safe meant. I only knew that it was the first time I ever saw fear in my mother's eyes. The next morning, she took out a box I hadn't seen before, a carved wooden chest with a rusted latch. From it, she pulled a folded veil, lace, fine and delicate, dyed a pale gray. Not white, not the color of fairy tales and storybook brides. I made this veil for your aunt's wedding, she said. But she never wore it. I didn't ask why. I didn't need to. She placed it over my head to check the fit. The lace fell over my eyes like fog. I could no longer see her face. Only mine in the mirror, blurred, small, and no longer a child. A few days later, a large parcel arrived from Warwick. Inside were swatches of fabric, a pair of gloves, and a short letter written in perfect script. Teach the girl how to walk, how to speak properly. A lady, no matter her age, must know how to carry herself, carry myself. I was taught to sit without swinging my feet, to sip tea without sound, to say thank you without looking up, to bow just enough, but not too much. No one told me what to do with my thoughts. No one asked if I wanted to be a lady. 1 week before the ceremony, another gift arrived, a golden hairpin shaped like a narcissus flower. I knew that flower first of spring, fragile and fast to wilt. My mother held it in her hands a long time before passing it to me. Without thinking, I asked, "What if I say no?" She looked at me, and for the first time in my life, she didn't look at me as a mother, but as a woman who had once asked the same question and never received an answer. "Clara, there are doors in this world that, once opened, you cannot close again." I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I simply shrank. Inside myself, like a creature being led into a golden cage, while people outside clapped and smiled and called it salvation. And when I stood in front of the mirror, the gray veil upon my head, I saw in my reflection something quietly, permanently lost. Not my freedom, not my childhood, but my right to take my time becoming a woman. The dress came folded in silence. It was delivered in a long wooden trunk lined with linen and cedar. 2 men carried it in without looking at me. They set it down in the corner of our small living room, like it contained something sacred or something dangerous. No one dared open it right away. Mother just stared at the box, her hands still damp from the wash basin. My father lit his pipe and left without a word. I sat on the floor, knees to chest, watching the way the shadows pooled around it like spilled ink. When we finally opened it slowly, cautiously, I expected something beautiful. What I found was something hollow. It was white, yes, but not the white of wonder or purity. It was a cold white, the white of bone, of ash. The fabric shimmered faintly in the light, edged with embroidery I didn't recognize, neither floral nor geometric. Something older, formal, heavy. It looked like it belonged to another world, and it did, because it didn't belong to me. Mother lifted it from the trunk with both arms, like a child too large to carry. The skirt spilled over her arms and onto the floor, trailing behind her like mist. "Let's try it on," she said softly. I didn't move. So she came to me, knelt down, and whispered, "It's just a fitting, Clara. Nothing final." But something had already ended. The dress didn't fit, of course. The bodice gaped at the shoulders. The sleeves hung past my fingertips. The waist sagged awkwardly on my still-growing frame. It made me look smaller, not bigger, like a child playing dress-up with death. Mother tugged at the seams, pinning them here and there with shaking fingers. "It can be adjusted," she said, but I wasn't thinking about stitching. I was thinking about how strange it was, how wrong, that this was the garment chosen for the beginning of my supposed life. A wedding dress should fit the body. This one fit the expectation. In the days that followed, tailors came and went. They spoke softly, didn't look at me. They poked and pinned and measured. They skipped over my narrow hips, my childish chest. One of them muttered something about growing into it and chuckled. I wanted to disappear. Each day, the dress grew closer to fitting. Each day, I felt further from myself. The morning of the wedding came with gray skies. Not stormy, just colorless. Like the world itself couldn't muster the energy to pretend. The house was quiet. No music, no guests, no laughter, only the sound of the dress being unwrapped one final time. Mother helped me into it. Her fingers were gentle but firm, as if afraid I might break, or run, or both. She buttoned the back slowly, smoothing the fabric down with her palms. Then she stood behind me, and I saw us in the mirror. She, still and pale, her eyes full of something I didn't have a word for. Me, in a dress meant for someone else. Not just in size, but in soul. "It suits you," she said, almost like a question. I didn't answer. When we stepped outside, the cart was already waiting. It was lined with fresh straw and white cloth, as if that would make it more proper, more bridal. There was no church, no aisle, no bouquet, just the cart, and a destination I had no say in. My father stood beside it, avoiding my gaze. He mumbled something about the weather, then turned away. Mother kissed my cheek, but her lips were cold. Her arms around me were warm, too warm. "You'll be all right," she whispered. "You'll have your own house, your own room. Servants, books, if you want them. You'll be looked after." I didn't want to be looked after. I wanted to be looked at, seen, but I said nothing. I climbed into the cart like a good girl, like a daughter, like a bride. As we pulled away, I looked back at our little house, at the clothesline swaying gently in the wind, at the tree I used to climb, at the garden where I buried my pet bird last spring. None of it waved goodbye. And neither did I, because some goodbyes are too big to fit in your mouth, especially when you're only 13. The first thing I noticed about the house was the silence. It wasn't the kind of silence you find in libraries or churches. It was older, thicker, a silence that seemed to wait. The Warwick estate stood on a hill surrounded by dying trees and stone walls too tall to see beyond. It wasn't beautiful, not in the way storybooks promise castles should be. There were no fountains, no gardens, no flowers growing wild through cracks. It looked like a house that had swallowed every laugh that ever tried to escape it. And now it was mine. The cart pulled into the gravel path. A man in a gray coat opened the door before we even knocked. He didn't introduce himself. He just bowed and stepped aside. "Welcome, Lady Warwick," he said. The title hit the floor harder than my shoes. Inside, the air was cold, so cold it smelled like stone. The ceilings were high, the windows narrow, and every wall was draped in heavy curtains that blocked out the day. Even the light seemed hesitant here, as if it had been told to behave. I was led up the grand staircase by a maid who never met my eyes. My room was at the far end of the west wing. It had a bed too big for one person, a fireplace too small for warmth, and a single chair beside the window that faced nothing but trees stripped bare. There were no mirrors, not in the bedroom, not in the hallway, not even in the washroom. I didn't realize it at first. Not until I tried to find one to fix my braid and found only wall after wall of bare hooks and blank space. I asked the maid. She blinked, lowered her gaze, and said the mirrors were taken down after the First Lady passed. The First Lady. His first wife, of course. The thought made something flutter at the back of my neck. A cold breeze, even though the window was shut. That evening, Lord Warwick summoned me to dinner. The dining room was a cathedral of stone and velvet. A long table stretched farther than necessary sat for two, but big enough for 20. He sat at the far end. I was placed opposite. The room echoed. He spoke little. He asked about my journey. I replied that it was smooth. He commented on the weather. I agreed that it was gray. When I thanked him for the dress, he said only, "It suited you better than I thought it would." He did not smile. Neither did I after the meal. I was escorted back to my room, alone, no farewell, no good night. The hallway seemed longer in the dark. Candles flickered in their sconces, and the portraits on the wall watched with eyes too clever, too real. Most were of men stern, powdered, faceless in their sameness. One space was empty, just a square of faded wallpaper where a frame had once hung. I stopped, stared. The shape was tall and narrow like a woman standing still. The maid behind me cleared her throat. "Please, miss, it's late." I didn't ask. I didn't want to know. That night, I lay in bed and listened. The house groaned. Floorboards sighed. Somewhere, a door creaked and closed, though no one had opened it. There were no crickets, no owls, just stone, and the occasional, almost imperceptible echo like a whisper not meant for ears. And still, no mirror. I missed my reflection. Not out of vanity, but reassurance. I wanted to see my face and know it was still mine. But here, in this house of velvet and fog, I was beginning to feel like I had been erased, replaced, inserted into a space where someone else had once stood. A bride-shaped hole, now filled. I found him by accident. It was a Wednesday morning, or at least I think it was. I had begun to lose track of the days in the Warwick estate. Every corridor looked the same. Every hour passed like the last, still, muted, muffled by velvet and stone. I had wandered down a hallway I hadn't seen before East Wing, maybe searching for air or something like it. That part of the house had tall windows, glass panes too high for anyone to reach without a ladder. And there he was, perched quietly on a narrow ledge, a cloth in one hand and a small bucket hooked to his belt. His coat was rolled up to the elbows, sleeves soaked. The light caught on the water trails he'd just wiped away, turning them silver for a moment, like veins across the sky. I didn't mean to make a sound, but the floor creaked beneath me. He turned his head. And for the first time in this house, someone looked me in the eyes. He didn't bow, didn't flinch, didn't scurry away like the other servants did whenever I entered a room. He just watched, not rudely, not boldly, just openly. Like I wasn't a title. Like I wasn't a burden handed over in silken silence. "Do you live here?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. He blinked. "I work here." His voice was low, roughened at the edges, but not unkind. He spoke slowly, as if unused to being asked questions, or perhaps unused to answering them. "What's your name?" I said. He hesitated, just for a second, then Elias. Elias, a simple name, honest. It felt like something solid in a place full of fog. Over the following days, I saw him again and again. Always cleaning, always quiet. Sometimes on ladders, sometimes crouched by windowsills, wiping away smudges left by hands long gone. He moved with the kind of precision that comes from practice, not just skill, but devotion. Like the glass deserved to see the world clearly, and perhaps he did too. I began to notice things. He never spoke unless spoken to, but when he did, he answered directly. No stammering, no avoiding. He never smiled first. But when he did smile rarely, it was the kind that didn't reach the lips, only the eyes. He didn't seem to belong here, and yet he moved through the halls like someone who knew every creaking floorboard, every draft, every whisper in the wallpaper. One morning, I passed him in the hallway as he was carrying a bucket down the stairs. I nodded. He nodded back. Nothing more. But it was the first time since I arrived that I didn't feel invisible. The others avoided him. I asked one of the kitchen girls who he was, where he came from. She shrugged and said, "Some orphan taken in by the master years ago. Keeps to himself. Doesn't talk much." Then, lowering her voice, bit strange. "Doesn't bow properly." I almost laughed. That I already knew. It began with a jasmine flower, fresh, still dewy, nestled where it shouldn't have been inside my desk drawer, tucked between an ink bottle and a folded scrap of parchment. At first I thought it had fallen from somewhere, but there was no jasmine growing on the estate grounds, and certainly none inside the house. I held it between my fingers, small and white, and for a brief moment, the entire room smelled like a memory I couldn't quite place. Sweet, wild, free. I didn't ask anyone. I didn't need to. A few days later, I found a book. Not on the shelves where the Warwick family's collection was neatly arranged and painfully dull, but on the windowsill of my room where the light came through at its softest. It was worn, frayed at the corners. A poetry collection. French, with English notes scribbled in the margins. Inside was a slip of paper, folded 4 times, not signed, not sealed. On it was written a single stanza: "We learn to love the silence more than sound. When all the world demands, we speak in chains." So I leave my thoughts not in my mouth, but in the open window when it rains. I read it 3 times. Then hid it under my pillow like a secret, like a lifeline. That night, I didn't sleep. Not for fear, but for the first time in weeks, for wonder. The gifts kept coming, never grand, never loud. A feather, deep blue and iridescent, resting on my nightstand like a question. A smooth pebble, round and cool, placed on my windowsill during a storm. A page torn from an old atlas with a small X marked in the middle of the sea. Each offering was quiet, measured, deliberate. Each one told me that I was not alone in my silence. He never said it aloud. But I knew, and perhaps that made it all the more sacred. One morning, while dusting an empty birdcage that hung in the east corridor, a decorative thing, unused, I found it. Inside the cage, tied to the bottom rung with a thin length of thread, was a tiny folded square of paper. No larger than my palm. My hands shook when I untied it. Inside was a drawing. Charcoal, rough, hurried, but I recognized it instantly. It was the back of a girl sitting on a windowsill looking out. My windowsill, my back, no face, no name, but I knew. And in the corner, in the smallest, faintest script, 4 words. I sat down on the floor of the corridor, the empty birdcage swinging slightly above me, and I cried. Not because I was sad, but because someone had seen me. Really seen me, not as Lady Warwick, not as a burden passed from one desperate household to another, but as Clara, the girl who once read aloud to rabbits, the girl who used to laugh in fields, the girl who still deep down wanted to be loved. I wrote later that night in the back of my journal, "I have fallen in love quietly, the way a servant dusts a table where no one is meant to see it, but everyone knows it was done." There is a moment in every child's life, though I suppose I was no longer a child when they realize the world is not fair. But it's one thing to know it in theory. It is another to sit at a table where meat steams in silver trays while the servants who carried them in aren't allowed to eat the scraps. It happened during one of Warwick's winter banquets. The estate hadn't been so loud in months. Suddenly, fireplaces were scrubbed clean, chandeliers dusted, crystal unpacked. The halls rang with the clack of polished shoes and the forced laughter of men who smelled of tobacco and politics. I was not seated with them, of course. I was placed at the far end of the table, decorative, silent, present only in theory. I had learned by then how to keep my spine straight, my mouth shut, and my eyes low. Elias served wine that night. He moved through the room like a shadow trained not to cast itself elegant, unseen, but I saw him, every time. The tilt of his tray, the quickness of his step, the way his eyes scanned the floor to avoid the guest's gaze. And yet, when he poured my glass, he met my eyes for just half a second. Half a second, and I felt more human than I had in weeks. The guests, Warwick's old friends, cousins, investors, were cruel in the quietest ways. Not violent, not loud, just dot, dot. Practiced. They joked about the kitchen girl's accent, about the stable boy who still walks like he's got hay in his boots, about how funny it was that the maid tried to curtsy when she carried a tray. Laughter, all of it. One of the men leaned toward Warwick and said, gesturing vaguely toward me, "She cleans up well. Hard to believe she came from cabbage and clay." Warwick didn't correct him. He smiled, and I smiled too, because I had been taught, never let them know you hear the insult, never give them the satisfaction of a flinch. But inside, I was splintering. After dessert-glazed pears, overripe with wine, the men played cards and smoked. The women, painted and perfumed, retreated to the drawing room where they complained about corsets while sipping champagne through crystal. I slipped out. Not because I was allowed, but because I was no longer being watched. In the hallway, I passed a young scullery maid standing stiff against the wall, eyes wide as a deer. Her lip was bleeding. I didn't ask why. I already knew. There were no punishments in this house for what men did after drink, only silence. Only stains you had to learn to wash out before dawn. Later that night in my room, I found a folded piece of paper slipped under my pillow. Elias. There was no name. But the handwriting was unmistakable. It read, "You do not belong among them, and I do not belong among you. But still I look for your shadow when I pass the window." I pressed the paper to my lips. And I cried, not just for myself, not just for Elias, but for the absurdity of a world that teaches men to laugh with their boots planted firmly on the backs of those who serve them. Because if you laugh too loudly, you might forget whose back you're standing on. And some of us are still breathing under there. There are rooms in that house I never intended to find. The wood room was one of them. It sat at the back of the estate, behind the east courtyard, barely more than a shed with a roof, where firewood was chopped, stacked, and left to season. It smelled of dust, old sap, and ash, cold in winter, damp in spring. No one visited it much. No one except Elias. I had followed him, though not deliberately. I'd seen him from my window, carrying a bundle of kindling across the back garden, his coat heavy with snowmelt. There was a rhythm to his steps, a kind of poetry in how quietly he moved, even when the ground cracked beneath his boots. I told myself I was just going for a walk, but I knew better. The door to the wood room was ajar when I arrived. A thin trail of sawdust led inside like breadcrumbs in a storybook. He was there, kneeling, splitting logs with practiced ease. His sleeves were rolled high, revealing arms lean and scarred, not from violence, but labor, honest work. I stood in the doorway for a moment before he noticed me. When he did, he didn't flinch. He simply said, "You shouldn't be here." I stepped inside anyway. We didn't speak at first. He returned to his work, and I sat on a pile of folded burlap sacks, watching. The room was silent, save for the steady crack of wood splitting and the occasional gust of wind whistling through the slats. I felt safer there than I had anywhere else in that house, not because it was warm, but because nothing in that room had ever lied to me. After a while, Elias looked up. His voice was softer than usual, almost careful. "Why did you follow me?" I didn't answer, not with words. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the slip of paper he'd left under my pillow the night before. I handed it to him. He didn't read it. He didn't need to. "It's not safe," he whispered. "I know." He stood then slowly, as if giving me time to change my mind, to run, but I didn't move. We stood there, facing each other, the cold between us somehow warmer than the fire in the manor's hearth. He looked at me the way no one else ever had. Not as a lady, not as a girl to be pitied or groomed or traded, but as someone whole, seen, chosen, and then he kissed me. It wasn't like the stories. There were no fireworks, no music, Just the smell of pine, the sting of winter on our skin, the dry snap of a log shifting beneath his boot. His lips were chapped, mine were trembling. And still, it was the most human thing I'd touched in months. I kissed him back. We stayed like that for a moment that didn't feel like a moment at all, but like a breath stolen from a world that didn't want us to have it. Then I pulled away, not out of regret, but out of knowing. If they find out, I whispered, they'll kill you. He nodded, not in fear, and understanding. Then we don't let them find out. I returned to my room with sawdust in my hair and a fire in my chest I didn't know how to hide. The next morning, Warwick summoned me for tea. He smiled, and I wondered if he could smell the truth on my skin. The truth began as a whisper. I didn't plan to say it. I hadn't even planned to see him that night. But something inside me, tired of corsets, of table manners, of smiling through dinners where no one asked what I thought, rose to the surface and refused to be quiet anymore. It was past midnight when I slipped out. The manor was asleep or pretending to be. Fires reduced to ash. Halls so dark they seemed to swallow sound. I walked barefoot, the stone floors biting cold into my heels. I found him in the stables. Elias was brushing one of the mares, his back to me. He didn't turn when I entered. He didn't need to. He knew my footsteps. I don't want to be a lady, I said. He froze. The brush stopped mid-stroke. The horse huffed gently but didn't stir. I don't want to host luncheons or choose curtains or spend the rest of my life sitting next to a man who thinks silence is something to be fed and dressed. He turned slowly, his eyes soft but wary. I took a breath, the kind you take before you do something foolish, or brave, or both. I want to leave. With you. For a long time, he said nothing. Then softly, Clara, you don't know what you're asking. I do. He shook his head. No, you know how it feels. But you don't know what it costs. I stepped closer. Then tell me. He leaned against the stable post, running a hand through his hair, his voice low and bitter. They'd call it theft, of property, of nobility, of order. He laughed once sharp, without humor. They wouldn't call it love. They wouldn't even call it betrayal. They'd call it dirt climbing the stairs. I didn't flinch. I don't care. You should. He looked at me then, not the way he had in the woodroom, not with hunger or tenderness, but with terror. They'd hang me, Clara. Those words fell between us like iron, and I realized this world was not built to keep me inside. It was built to keep him out. And every step I took toward freedom dragged him closer to the gallows. I'm not afraid for me, I whispered. He came forward, gently, hands trembling. He touched my face like I was made of glass, but I am. We stood there for a long time, wrapped in the quiet hum of horses and moonlight. And though we didn't kiss, I swear I felt something pass between us, something more fragile than lips, more dangerous than love, a truth neither of us could undo. That to love each other was not enough. We had to survive it. Some men do not need to raise their voices to be feared. They do not slam doors or throw fists or shout across rooms. They simply sit still, speak softly, and make the walls feel as though they've leaned in to listen. That was Warwick. And Warwick had stopped sleeping. It began with small things. A new guard posted near the servants' stairs. A lock changed on the cellar door. The hallway lamps lit later into the night. And then one morning, I woke to find that the corridor outside my room had been polished spotless, except for the faintest scuff of a boot outside my door, as though someone had stood there. For hours, watching, I asked the maid. She went pale. I wouldn't. Ask questions, milady, which of course meant I had to. Elias was the one who told me. We met behind the smokehouse, beneath the cover of fog and the smell of curing meat. There are whispers, he said quietly. That he's watching. Me? He nodded. I swallowed hard. Us? He didn't answer, but he didn't have to. I remembered then the way Warwick had looked at me during dinner the night before, eyes calm, hands folded, saying nothing. But something in his silence had felt sharp, measured, like a trap with the bait already set. We became more careful. No more notes, no more late night walks, no more glances held too long when others might see. But the heart does not know how to unlearn its rhythm. And love once spoken, once tasted, does not retreat. It happened on a night when the firewood was running low. The house had grown bitterly cold, and the fire in the east hall had died. One of the maids asked me if I might help select the kindling, since Warwick had always said the lady should know the hearth. I didn't think twice. I went in. The woodroom was warm, a miracle in winter. The logs stacked high, the scent of cedar wrapping around me like a memory. And then I heard him. Clara, Elias said from the shadows. He had come to restock the shelves. We hadn't seen each other in 3 days. It felt like years. I don't know who stepped forward first. Perhaps we both did. Our hands touched near the firewood, fingers brushing without permission. My name left his lips like a prayer and a warning all at once. It's not safe, he whispered again. Always that phrase. Always too late. He kissed me, this time without hesitation. And I kissed him back. It was not desperate. It was not hurried. It was the kind of kiss people might die for, and someone was watching. I didn't hear the door, didn't hear the footsteps. Only the voice, cold and clear. I wondered how long it would take for the rat to find the sugar. We froze. Elias stepped back first. I turned, and there he was, Warwick, standing in the doorway, hands clasped behind his back. No fury, no yelling, just something far worse. Control, complete, calculated, coiled like a serpent. I should have guessed, he said, stepping inside. A peasant's daughter longing for a servant's touch. How poetic. Elias stepped in front of me. Warwick smiled. Ah, a hero too. Then he turned to me. And you, Clara, I gave you everything. I took you in from filth and gave you silk. And still you crawl back to the gutter. My voice trembled. I love him. He didn't flinch, didn't blink. He just said, you won't see him again. Then he turned and left. And we both knew it was not a threat. It was a promise. They took him before dawn, no trial, no question, no explanation. Just boots in the hall, leather gloves on rough hands, and the sound of silence doing exactly what it was told. I wasn't there. Later, one of the scullery maids would tell me she saw Ilias dragged across the courtyard, shirt torn, lip split, wrists bound like a criminal. They beat him, she whispered. He didn't scream. I asked where they took him. She only shook her head. They say he's gone. Gone. The word echoed through me like an iron bell. Hollow, ringing, final. They didn't speak to me for hours. No confrontation, no demands. No angry accusations from Warwick. No lectures about shame or scandal or betrayal. Just silence. And then a door. Not one of the grand oak doors carved with crests and lined with velvet. No. This one was narrow, iron-bound, hidden behind a wall panel I didn't know opened. They locked me inside. No light, no warmth. No name for the place. Just stone and silence. And the smell of rot and cold earth. I lost track of time after the 3rd day. The first I screamed. The second I begged. The third I listened. To nothing. To the sound of myself unraveling. They left food sometimes. A crust of bread. A bowl of water so cold it made my teeth ache. But no voice. No face. No clock. No Elias. I dreamt of him. Not the real him now. In dreams he was brighter, warmer, safe. He would knock on the wall 3 times, and I'd knock back. He would press poems into my palms with hands that didn't bleed. In dreams, we ran through a field of jasmine. In dreams, we weren't punished for tenderness. But then I would wake, if it could be called waking to stone and silence, and the memory of his name burned against my ribs like a brand. Sometimes I thought I heard footsteps. Sometimes I thought I heard his voice. But the mind, when starved of light and sound, begins to feed on itself. And I was starving. One night, though it could have been morning or evening or anything in between, the door creaked open. A figure entered. I shielded my eyes, though there was no light, only movement. A scent I recognized, lavender, faint and fading. It was the older maid, the one who rarely spoke. She knelt beside me and whispered, "You'll be let out soon, but he won't." I didn't ask who she meant, because I already knew. Elias was gone, and I'd lived. And that somehow was the worst part. They call it justice when a man with power decides what pain should look like. They call it order, decorum, correction, but I know what it was. It was punishment, not for betrayal, not for disobedience, but for love. And for the audacity to believe it could live in a house built on silence. They told me it was an accident, that Elias had fallen from the north tower sometime during the night, that no one had seen him go up, that no one had heard him fall. "It was quick," said Warwick, his voice low, face composed. "He didn't suffer." I stood there in the drawing room, hands folded, hair combed, wearing a dress I hadn't chosen. A teacup rested in my palm, trembling just slightly. No one looked me in the eye. There was no funeral. Only a letter posted to no one and a new boy in the stables by week's end. Thinner, quieter, careful not to look up. The staff moved on quickly, or pretended to. The head housekeeper sped about, wasted youth. The butler ordered new linens. The maids scrubbed out the footprints in the tower stairs. And this world spun on. But something inside me had stopped turning. They never said his name again. Not once. Not in apology. Not in anger. Not in remembrance. It was like he'd been swept from the floor along with the dust. Gone. Conveniently. Permanently. I tried once in the quiet after supper. I whispered, "Elias," aloud to myself. The fire cracked. And then Warwick stepped into the room. He poured himself a drink slowly, deliberately. "There are some names," he said, without looking at me, "that do more harm than good to remember." I didn't answer, not because I agreed, but because I had nothing left to give him, not words, not rebellion, not even tears. He had taken everything that still made me human and dressed me back up like a lady. In the weeks that followed, I was instructed to resume my place. Letters were written in my name. Dinners hosted in my presence. Dresses tailored to make me appear older than I was, wiser, more refined. "You are the lady of this house now," said Warwick one morning, as if it were a favor, as if I should thank him. He never raised his voice, never touched me, but I felt him in every hallway, in every closed door, in every silence that followed my steps like a loyal hound. At night, I lay in bed and counted the stars through the sliver of window in my chamber. I didn't cry. Crying would have made it real, and I couldn't let it be real. Because if it was real, it meant he was truly gone, that he had truly died, and that I had let it happen. I began to write his name in my notebook, over and over, Elias, 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 until the ink bled through the page and stained the sheets beneath my hands. I memorized the shape of his name. I pressed it to the roof of my mouth like a wafer. I buried it in the hollow of my chest like a relic. I would never speak it aloud again, but I would never forget how it sounded, either. Because a name doesn't die when a body does. It dies when the world decides to stop saying it. And I was the only world left that remembered. Ink is a dangerous thing in the wrong hands, But it is even more dangerous in the right ones, especially when they don't look like they belong to anyone powerful. I was no longer watched closely. They thought I was broken, a proper lady, silent, compliant, harmless. What they didn't know was that silence, too, has teeth. I found the ink bottle in the drawer of Warwick's old study. Not the main one, where he held court with lawyers and landowners. The other one, darker, quieter, the one no one else used anymore, where books sat untouched and the fire had long since gone cold. It was glass, heavy, black as a locked door. I stole it like one might steal a kiss, gently, quietly, like it was always mine. The letter came together slowly, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I had too much. I wrote in the mornings before the house stirred. I wrote in the afternoons, hidden behind the curtain of a half-read book. And at night, I pressed the pages beneath my pillow like a secret scripture. I wrote about Elias, not how he died, but how he lived, how he loved, how he fought silence with poetry, how his name was being erased, and how I could not bear to be the only one who remembered it. The letter was addressed to Father Marin, a name I had seen once, scribbled in the corner of an old book Elias had given me. A priest, I thought, or something like it. Not a man of robes and ritual, but one Elias had trusted. He reads the truth even when it trembles, Elias once told me. He listens harder than most. That was enough. I didn't beg in the letter. I didn't plead for rescue. I simply told the truth, the kind no court or noble crest would accept, but the kind you can feel burning behind your ribs. The hardest part was getting it out. I couldn't hand it to a maid. Warwick watched the staff too closely. I couldn't leave it with the milk deliveries. Those were checked. In the end, it was the chimney boy, barely 12. Fast as a shadow, thin as thread. I found him near the kitchens, soot still on his fingers. You know where the old chapel is? I asked. He nodded. Take this. No one sees it. No one touches it. Only the man who wears the brown scarf and sings when he sweeps. The boy blinked. And if I do, I knelt to his height. I'll owe you more than anyone ever has. He took it, and for the first time in months, I let myself hope. That night, I dreamed of ink not black, but gold, flowing from my fingertips, carving Ilias's name into the stars where no one could erase it. In the morning, I woke up crying. But I wasn't afraid, because secrets kept in bottles can spill, and words, once read, can't be locked away again. There are mornings when the world feels like it's holding its breath. The air stills, the light shifts, and every sound, even the wind, waits. That morning, the bells didn't ring. Not the dining bell, not the prayer bell, not the bell that summoned maids or sent children running from halls. Silence in a house as large as Warwick Manor is never natural. It means something has broken, or is about to. I had been pretending for days, a cough here, a pale face, a hand pressed against my forehead with dramatic flair. I whispered words like faint and fever and not quite right. They bought it. Warwick, amused, called for the physician, but not urgently. Girls like her, I heard him say once, like to wilt. It reminds them they are flowers, and so I wilted. On cue, until the day I caught fire. The blaze began in the west wing, a forgotten candle, a loose curtain, or so they said. But I had seen the chimney boy again the day before, smudged with soot and whispers, and I had handed him something else. A flintstone, a piece of paper, a nod. Nothing spoken aloud, nothing that could be traced, only trust. It began with smoke. A thin gray wisp curling into the sky, unnoticed at first. Then shouts. Crashing footsteps, doors flung open, the staff scattered. The horses screamed. The manor groaned as if something inside it had finally snapped. And through it all, I walked, not ran. Not stumbled, walked. Like someone who belonged to the chaos, not someone fleeing it. I knew which hallway to take, which stair creaked loudest, which passage behind the pantry led straight to the edge of the gardens. Warwick was nowhere to be seen. The fire had given me what he never would, a door. The bells still didn't ring. Even as flames licked the tower, even as windows shattered, even as someone shouted, "Where is she?" Even then, the bells stayed silent. I crossed the courtyard barefoot. The smoke stung my eyes. My nightdress clung to my skin. My lungs burned, but I was moving. And no one stopped me. In the distance, the chapel bell, small, rusted, long forgotten, swayed in the smoke, untouched. It didn't chime. But I heard it anyway, in my chest, in the spaces where Elias's name used to echo, in the rhythm of my feet striking dirt. I didn't look back, not when the fire grew brighter, not when someone screamed my name behind me, not when the world I had been forced to play a role in began to crumble behind its velvet curtains. I kept walking. And when I reached the woods, dark, quiet, waiting, I whispered into the trees, "You may take everything, but not this, not my feet, not my name, not my story." Freedom, it turns out, is not just a door you pass through. Sometimes it's a door with hands that drag you back. They found me 2 days later, a carriage with no crest, moving faster than any farm cart should, men with quiet mouths and firm grips, and a voice's voice cutting through the trees like a blade through silk. "Clara." I didn't scream, didn't fight. Something in me had already prepared for this. I had known from the moment I saw the sun rise through the trees and didn't weep with joy. I was not free. Not yet. Back in Warwick Manor, everything had changed except the man who ruled it. The fire had gutted a wing, but he stood untouched, like stone never learned how to burn him. They dressed me again. They fed me again. They locked my door at night now, but they let me walk during the day, always with a shadow behind me. Warwick came to see me on the second evening. He wore gray, no smile, but the gleam in his eyes, that same cold shine I remembered from the wood room, was sharper than ever. He poured wine, not for me, just for himself. And then he said it. "You were a girl when I found you, Clara. I see now I made the mistake of giving you too much leash, too much silk, too much sympathy." I didn't speak. He stepped closer, close enough that I could see the red in his eyes, the tired behind the fury. "We will begin again." A pause, this time from the ground up, as if you were nothing. He meant to erase me. Not with violence, no, he fancied himself above that. He would erase me with lessons, with cold dinners and rewritten etiquette, with locked pages and muted colors, with isolation so refined it would seem like a privilege. He would take everything he hadn't already stolen, even the memory of Elias, even the sound of my own name, spoken in my own voice. But fate, it seems, had grown tired of him too. It was the fourth morning. The storm had rolled in during the night thunder crawling like wolves across the hills. The house had barely slept. At breakfast, Warwick did not come down. By mid-morning, his valet knocked once, twice, 3 times. No answer. The door was opened. He was found slumped beside the hearth. No bruises, no wounds. Just gone. A glass of wine spilled near his feet. A look of faint surprise still on his face. They said it was his heart. He was under stress, the doctor whispered. He ruled too hard, said the cook. He deserved it, said no one, but I heard it anyway. I stood outside his room that evening, staring at the great carved door. The silence inside was so loud. For a moment, I felt nothing. Then something strange, not relief, not joy, a stillness, like standing on the other side of a scream. And then the quiet words rose inside me like a prayer. I am not afraid. Not anymore. No chains, no locked doors. No eyes watching from behind velvet curtains. I was free, and it hurt more than the prison. After Warwick's death, the manor became a carcass the vultures circled. Lawyers came in polished shoes. Family members I'd never met arrived with fake tears and real greed, and servants walked lighter, not happier, just lighter. No one questioned me. No one asked where I'd gone, or why the West Wing always smelled faintly of smoke, or why the ledger pages now had one more entry scratched out in a trembling hand. The lady of the house had no reason to exist anymore, and so she disappeared. They gave me papers to sign. Inheritance clauses, asset transfers, letters from Warwick's cousin who fancied himself the new master. I signed what I had to, rejected what I could, and then I asked for one thing: let me leave. It surprised them. You don't want anything? They asked. Not even the house? I shook my head. I've lived in it. That was enough. I left at dusk. The sky was the same color as the stone walls, bruised violet with streaks of ash gold. I wore a plain dress. No corset, no rings. Just a shawl, and the memory of a boy who used to leave me jasmine in the windowsill. I could have stayed, could have become some pale shadow of a widow, dignified and tragic. I could have played the role, worn the silk again, hosted the dinners, and no one would have stopped me. But that would have meant choosing what Warwick left behind, not what I had lost, not who I had been. And for the first time in my life, I did not let someone else decide who I was. I took the long road out of the valley, the one that passed through the village where Elias once bought ink and apples, the one that wound past the chapel with the broken bell. I passed the fields and the old stone wall where we had sat once, silently knowing love had no place in houses like his. I touched the moss. It was soft, alive, and I was too. Somewhere along the road I cried, not for Warwick, not for the years, not even for myself. I cried for Elias, not just because he was gone, but because I never got to say goodbye with words that didn't tremble. But I did say something to the wind, to the stars, to the woods that had hidden me once. I loved you. I still do. And now I get to say that without asking permission. Freedom is not a door, it is a field. And the first time you step into it barefoot, you will bleed, but you will keep walking, because pain finally is yours. They ask me now, sometimes, the little ones with bright eyes and quiet shoes, were you ever married, Miss Clara? And I smile, not because the question doesn't ache, but because it comes from a place where love is still imagined as gentle. Yes, I say, but not to the man I loved. They don't understand, not yet. But one day they will read it, in the pages I've written, in the silences between the lines, in the jasmine pressed between chapter 14 and 15. I opened the school 5 years after I left the manor, a small cottage on a hill, whitewashed walls, a bell that always works, no uniforms, no locked doors, no rules that tell you who to become, only books, warm bread, hands that don't strike, voices that don't command, only invite. It started with 3 girls, then 7, then more. Some were orphans, some were thrown away. All of them had eyes like mine once were, too old, too fast. In my study, behind a glass case, sits a piece of cloth, faded blue, frayed at the corners. Soft as breath, it's the one Elias used to tie his books with. The one he wrapped around a flower once and left at my windowsill. I never washed it, never folded it neatly. It lives like a relic because it is. A proof, a prayer, a promise. I never remarried. I wore no veils after him, lit no candles for another name, but I wrote. And when I wrote, I let his name bloom in ink. Elias, not hidden, not whispered, not erased. I wrote him laughing. I wrote him stubborn. I wrote him as real as any god ever carved into chapel stone, because the world tried to forget him, and I would not allow it. Some days I still wake up thinking of the manor, of the gray stone and cold halls, of the girl who once thought silence was safety, but then I hear footsteps, bare ones, running down the corridor outside, laughter, and I remember we were never meant to survive alone. If he could see me now, I think Elias would not ask for grief. He'd ask for joy, not loud, but honest. Like a window cracked open on a spring morning, so I give him that. Every time I open the school gates, every time I teach a girl to read her own name, every time I sit at my desk, light a candle, and begin again. I wrote his name on the final pages, not because the story was his, but because he made mine possible. The fields are golden again. They always turn that way in late summer, just before the first winds of September carry the scent of ripening things and half-shed leaves. From my window, I can see them, the girls, running barefoot, their floral skirts catching sunlight like sails, laughing in that way only children who have never been told to be silent can laugh, wild, free, unapologetic. And in them sometimes I think I see her, the little girl I used to be, the one who ran through wheat with dandelions in her fists, the one who believed every story her mother ever whispered, the one who didn't yet know what a contract felt like when placed into small hands. They don't know I'm watching. They don't know how I memorized the sound of their laughter like prayer, or how some mornings I wake up just to hear it. They don't need to know. Some gifts are not meant to be seen, only given. In my study, the candle burns lower than it used to. My hand is slower now, but still steady. Today, I write the final line of my story, not because there is nothing more to say, but because everything worth remembering has already been said. The ink glides, the silence listens, and I find myself whispering almost without realizing, if I were born again, I pause, not to doubt, but to feel it. The weight of it, the wish in it. And then I finish. I would still be me, but this time I would choose me first. A wind brushes the window. A petal flutters in through the open sill, and the laughter outside swells like music. I do not wipe the tear from my cheek. I let it fall. Onto the page, onto the name, onto the life that was never small, even when it was made to be so.